This is Basket Case Clubs, CPR Group's podcast where we turn basket case clubs into showcase clubs. Hello everyone and welcome back to Basket Case Clubs. I'm Michael Connolly and it is once again, after a bit of a gap for the Christmas and New Year break and the end of season and the beginning of new season and all of the other things that are going on in this world, break. It's nice to be back, I think for the first time in 2026. Joining me as always is my brother and partner in basket casey goodness, Steve Connolly. G'day, Steve. How you doing?
Hello. Happy New-ish
Don't
year.
say that. Don't say that.
23rd of Feb. Yeah.
Yeah. It's been a fascinating start to the year. Funny how, remember in the old days...
It's been a bloody fast start to the year. Where's the last month and a half gone? Yeah.
Hitting the ground running. It's like... we get into the AO season, so the summer of tennis over January, and we're going, oh, this is cool. And then you think, oh, that's done. It's going to be ages before the F1. It's just around the corner, so it's the next big thing. So
I see what you did there, just around the corner.
Nice one. Thank you.
Motorsport analogy. Yeah.
I absolutely meant that. I was just, going to say that it's interesting how in Australia our year revolves around sport. It finishes on sport, by the way, with the Boxing Day test. So, and then we've got the Winter Olympics. So it's always a busy time. So before we get into this episode, Steve, I want to just touch on something a little bit controversial because I want to know your opinion. I think I know it, but I'm wondering if it's different than mine. Sports where it's not necessarily the person who scores the most points, kicks the most goals, crosses the finish line fastest, jumps the highest, lifts the most.
Some easily quantifiable measure of the winner.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now remember, I'm an artist. I'm a muso, so it's okay for me to say this.
Mm-hmm.
But
so we're talking about a level of subjectivity in the officiating.
Yeah. If it's based on...
just for our listeners, I have no idea where he's going with this, but I feel like I'm on the same page.
Yeah. So I have no problems with these activities being competitive. I have no problem with them being artistic and beautiful. You look at artistic gymnastics, it is an amazing feat.
Superhuman. Yeah.
So, yeah. Is it the same and is it fair on those athletes? And how can I get around this safely? Is it fair on those athletes that they get judged based on what a bunch of people who, looking at them, it looks like some of them probably haven't competed or coached in those sports for, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 12 decades or ever. Is that as reasonable as someone who can just go, I jumped the highest, I ran the fastest? Yeah. Anyway.
Well, it's so what's your question? Do I agree that it's unreasonable for those people to be judged by those said judges who may be a little
recognizing that I'm doing you the favor of cutting you off here, Steve. Recognizing that Basket Case Clubs is somewhat a public forum, I think I might have backed out of actually asking a question and actually putting a stake in the ground and saying, this is what I think, and I turned it into a question. Did you like that?
Yeah.
I don't remember what the question was, and you beeped your way out of it as well.
Yeah. I think it's an interesting discussion that we have embarked upon in the past, not necessarily in this public forum. So probably,
I think it's probably
willing to speak a little more.
Glass of
freely.
Red or something brown and a very late night.
But it's interesting that you raised this because just yesterday I heard from a very well-respected AFL umpire at the Club Expo that we presented at, and he was the keynote speaker, and he did a really, really good job of couching his messages in a way that was applicable for everyone because there's a whole host of people that we were presenting to, so club leaders, committee members, there were umpires, coaches, other operational volunteers in the auditorium for the keynote speech. And then we branched out and did our streams with, various focuses for the people in the room. But what came to mind when you were asking your question that turned into something other than a question was we're talking about subjectivity. But even in those sports where someone crosses the finish line first or one team scores more goals.
Now, are you?
Well, it's funny that you say that because that's where I thought you were going to start with. And as everyone on this podcast know, all of
No,
our
I was
listeners
thinking ice
know,
dancing because it's Winter Olympics time.
well, yes, of course, yes. But as everyone knows, I think that race walking is the world's greatest celebration of mediocrity because I could just cast my mind back to that whenever it was in history that someone said, I'm going to race you 42 odd kilometers in that direction. But
50
you,
something.
is it? Is it? I thought it
Yeah.
was like Olympic.
No, I think it's longer than the marathon.
Okay. I thought it was
Just be
Olympic
very,
marathon distance.
just be very careful. Have you ever actually done race walking?
You'd think so with my back being the way it is. But
Not,
you can't
neither
run.
have I,
You can't
but
run.
it looks excruciatingly painful and
Yep.
difficult.
Oh, and look, these are elite athletes, no doubt. Nevertheless, I'm going to keep picking on them because it's a funny
Oh, I
political
don't think you're
take.
picking on them. I think you're picking on the official who, and it always looks
Chosen the
like they're
red
taking
paddle.
such great
Yep,
pride when they walk out onto the track and go, and their
right in their
face
face.
at the card. You're out because you lifted your feet.
You
Oh.
can't have both feet off the ground at the same time. So,
But,
so where I
but
was,
for a number of times, like how many times do you get before you're
yeah,
black flagged?
yeah. Well,
And
so,
you're out of the race. It's not like a pit lane penalty that,
no, you're
closes
out.
up under safety car. You're
Yep,
just out.
you're out. Yeah.
Ooh, yeah.
Yeah, you're right.
Tough, man.
But what it raises is this question of subjectivity. So the one of the stories when this AFL umpire, very well respected AFL umpire, was asked what moments throughout your umpiring history can you think back to that give you goosebumps? And of course, 100,000 people on AFL Grand Final Day in the MCG, and you're the one on the field in the bright green shirt. And he reflected on one particular call that he had to make, and it was, he said, "I know what's going to happen here. They're not going to like this. 50,000 people are going to make one call, and 50,000 people are going to make another call, but they're all going to be upset with me doing this 3 minutes to the siren in the grand final." And he said, the reason that I blew the whistle and the reason that I made the decision to make the right decision at the time is that players place their trust in me to do my job, and that's where my job starts and finishes. And it was a really interesting reflection from an AFL umpire perspective, which is not one that I've necessarily, I've done a bit of football refereeing and so on, never to anything near an elite standard, but being the one to make the decision, which is likely to make at least half the people at that facility quite upset with you at any given time, is a very compromising situation to be put in. And it's all about subjectivity. You have perceived that someone's breached the rules for some reason, and sometimes you're going to make a mistake. Sometimes you're going to get it wrong, and you're going to reflect on those decisions down the track, and one team might get a goal that arguably they didn't deserve to get because of your decision. But I think that if you're serving the game, and in the case of your question that wasn't a question, if the judges genuinely think that they're doing the best thing for the sport in judging each competitor in a particular way, then who are we to say that it's anything less of a sport than one that has a more quantifiable and less subjective determining factor to decide the winner? What a rambling answer, but it's a very fascinating question that we didn't intend to delve into today. And Jess, who knows? Maybe you'll cut some of this out, but if you do, it'll die a very exciting death on the cutting room floor.
Who are we to decide? Indeed. Look, I've heard some
Governance,
interesting.
however, completely objective, not a human emotion in sight.
Oh, look, it for me it starts for two reasons, and then we'll move on. So remember, Matt in our team used to say, if the Olympic Games or Paralympic Games is not the pinnacle of that sport where everyone who plays it aspires to get to,
Yep.
then it doesn't deserve a spot in the
Shouldn't be in
Olympics.
that format, shouldn't be in
Yeah,
those games. Yeah.
yeah. So tennis unfortunately fits in there.
Yep. Many sports
Golf
do.
would fit in there.
Breakdancing.
Basketball. This is a segue of segues, isn't it? But there's two reasons that I'm miffed because as far as sport goes, the only sport that I got properly good at was water skiing, and it's not going to be an Olympic sport because you need a boat. So, but then I'm going, well, so you've got something that's
I wouldn't
pulling
be so
something
sure.
else.
I
Like
wouldn't be so
people
sure.
ride horses
Yep.
in the Olympics, but a horse is an animal. So what if I get if we can ski behind a dolphin or a pod of dolphins or a whale or sharks, make it really fun?
Yeah,
Then can it be an Olympic sport? And the other one is that sorry, I don't anymore. I either get paid or I don't get paid when I'm playing guitar. But I've got marks for playing guitar, and I accept that. Like, can I do it well enough to the standard of the people adjudicating, or better than somebody else if it's like in a Stedford or some form of competition, or just for university marks?
yeah.
So that I've got no problem with that. Whether it exists on the same at the same level, not on the same level, but at the same level, because I think that it's just as important, and the amount of guidance that I've been able to give to people in a sporting context because of what I've done in a completely different context in music. It's all about discipline and hard work and practice
Mm.
and sacrifice and late nights and all of the things that mean that
You're not
now I
selling
can.
it. You're not selling it.
No, it's hard. It's hard, but that's what makes it, and that's why I'm shit at
The
golf,
pinnacle.
Steve. Because I I haven't played as much golf as I've played guitar. Oh, I probably now that I think about it, which would have made me more money if I'd spent, I don't know, the 50,000 hours or more that I've spent playing guitar. If I'd spent that hitting golf balls, I'd either be really good or really, really
Really
angry.
grumpy.
Yeah,
Really grumpy.
you'd have a lot of bent
The
shafts.
point at the top of the pyramid in both of those cases is a very sharp one.
Yes.
So yeah,
Yeah. It is a pointy pyramid. But that's life. The long
yeah.
tail, sorry, the long tail of the spiky head.
Hmm.
There's only one Tay-Tay. But there you go onto YouTube and watch all of the Tay-Tay wannabes. Steve, don't do that. Don't do that. It's a rabbit hole from which you shall not emerge.
Oh, what on earth are we actually here to talk about?
So this is fascinating because I've given Steve the heads up that I've got a topic for today's discussion, but he doesn't know about it. And suffice it to
This
say,
might
it
have been
was
it.
it
This might
was
have been
not
it.
this. It was not this. So let's see if we can get through it really quickly. The problem that I want to put on the table for you is that when we get a committee, let's say we've got a nice sized committee of 5 people, so a reasonable sized club, we've got 5 people on that committee. If I was to separate those 5 people or give them an individual survey that they had to fill in, and I said, in your own words, describe the job of the president of this committee or this club, they'd probably give me an answer that was fairly similar, all 5 of them.
Hmm.
If I said, write down the job of the secretary, they'd do the same thing. If I said, write down the job of the treasurer, they'd probably do the same thing. And we can unpack those separately, but the one where I want to start is the one with ambiguity. It's the vice president. If I ask them, what's the job of the vice president? There's a very good chance I'd get an answer very similar to the old Chinese proverb, lying in the same bed, dreaming different dreams. What is the job of a vice president? And this being the start of the year, I've been doing a lot of work with university clubs and societies, and a lot of them have multiple vice presidents. And do they play a role in governance? Well, because they're a vice president, technically, yes, and they come to all of the executive or the committee meetings in those contexts. But what's their job? In the case of a vice president that has a named portfolio, so vice president academic, vice president equity, vice president women's, you can infer a portfolio of work that sits underneath that. So they've got a job
And you
in
can really
leading a
focus.
subcommittee.
Okay, and then you can really focus on the portfolio, and the vice president element of the title kind of disappears in those cases, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
well, not necessarily, because if they're still coming to those executive meetings, then they retain that governance function,
Yep.
strategic governance function, while also then filling the operational role. And just quickly to get this clear in my own mind, then, in these situations, is the governance function that they fill largely one of being a conduit between that subcommittee that they head up and the board or executive?
It's both. It's a bit of a straddling role. So it's from a governance perspective, the answer is yes. but there's a lot of doing involved in those cases as well because they're doing both parts of it. They're sitting below the line doing operations in running that portfolio because often it's just purely doing because it's a subcommittee of one. So in
Mm.
cases that get more sophisticated, then they might be the chair of a subcommittee as well, and we often see that for the clubs and societies portfolio, for instance, because they would head up the subcommittee that then allocates affiliation, allocates funding through grants and those sorts of things.
Hmm.
In sport, we sometimes have named portfolios. It's less common in my experience, though, but you might have a junior vice president, a senior vice president, a women's vice president
Yeah,
as well. And you've probably seen that
a
in
couple of those.
clubs that have merged.
Absolutely, yes. In terms of male and female merged, so they've still got the legacy of prior separation reflected in their structure today. You mean?
Yeah, and look, but if it's portfolio based, then when it comes, and again, we've got to be careful about crossing the line or straddling the line of governance and operations. But if it's portfolio based and there's a job to do that falls to that person, then it's clear the issue that I'm talking about doesn't really exist. But
Mm.
it's in the majority of cases where if there is a vice president, apart from filling in for the president in the absence of the president, what's the job?
Yep.
But the story that I want to share with you is one that goes back a long time, where they actually dug out a job description for me because I did this exercise with them. I said, explain it to me what it means, and I got different answers. But when I made them dig, they found the job description, and when the vice president read it, she said, "I'm going to have to quit. I can't do this job because it said fill in for the president in the president's absence." But also fill in for the secretary in the secretary's absence, fill in for the treasurer in the treasurer's absence, and or do all such things as instructed by the president, secretary, and treasurer, or any other position in the club. It was just basically be this lackey that takes everyone's problems and everyone's monkeys
All
and makes
the
them
all
go
the
away.
crap that other people don't want to do.
Yeah, yeah. So completely unsustainable. So that was a great catalyst then for unpacking what we should thought it should be. But so before we go there, what have you said? And obviously, I've given you plenty of time to prepare for this, but I can see you're looking into space.
Oh, well, actually, what I was doing is I was going to a couple of the websites of clubs that I met yesterday because I met a couple of vice presidents. So one of them was a vice president girls. And as you can probably imagine, that's a role that is associated with developing and fostering the junior female participant cohort within that AFL club. Um, Vice President Junior. So just out of interest, so these are executive roles, very similar to the scenario that you've spelt out there in the University Student Association sector in some of our AFL clubs. So, and look, it is certainly something that I have seen. I must admit that the vice president position is one that over the last decade I have seen less and less of. So more clubs are realizing that it's a position that is a legacy position and has historically been seen as one of four executive positions in inverted commas. So president, treasurer, secretary, and then the vice president rounding out that executive of four. Now, I think that part of the reason for that is that we've been working with clubs to write that position out of their constitution because they've realised, even if they hadn't articulated it really clearly to themselves until they met with us, that hey, we don't really need that role anymore.
And
But
if we
we're
want it, so long as the Constitution supports the establishment of it in the
Yep,
future.
that's right. Yeah, so we haven't excluded it necessarily from being able to be created, but we've just written it out as a position that must, they
Must
must
have.
seek to
Mm.
fill each year or each election cycle. So but then where the position does exist and there's not any real job for them to do other than the president's job in their absence. I've never heard of it being, prescribed that they've got to do the secretary's job in their absence and the treasurer's in theirs and so on. But yeah,
Yeah,
that's
not anymore, trust me.
you'd be seeing my resignation pretty quickly too. But we have for some time now. This is probably going back several decades advocated for that role to be the planning coordinator. So to be the champion of the organisation's strategic plan or at least strategic direction and to drive the creation and review of that plan, but also to be the one charged with tracking progress against that strategic document. And it gives that position then very clearly a portfolio that matters, and it matters from a strategic governance sense, not just an operational sense.
It gives them, the vice presidents in that situation where that is how the position is defined, a really clear role during meetings because it's
Yep.
strategic, it's strategy,
Yep.
and it's their job to do that work that everyone else forgets because each of the named positions has a lot to do.
Yeah.
So with Treasury, for instance, there's a lot that they need to do in preparing reports alone, let alone comparing those reports to the actuals versus budget tracking to make sure we're on track with where we wanted to be. So there's a lot of work in that. And when you're
Mm.
buried, and I remember doing this a few weeks ago in Canberra, and when reflecting at the end of the 2 day course down there, saying what was the most valuable or interesting thing that you took away from this training, it was watching you shuffle. So what I had done is I said, when you're in a job that's a voluntary job that it has a lot of work to do, like Treasury, for instance, there's a lot of tiny steps that you need to take. So you need to put one foot in front of the other and take it again. But they move very fast because the world around us moves fast and our members expect a lot of us. So when you're taking tiny steps very quickly, that's called a shuffle. And if you don't watch your feet when you're shuffling, you can fall over. And if you fall over, you feel like everyone's laughing at you for looking like a dick. And so you don't want to do that. So you watch your feet. But when you're watching your feet, you can veer off course without knowing it. And so while everyone's watching their feet, the way I like to explain it is the vice president should be the one saying, come on, guys, chins up. Let's look at the horizon and
Mm.
look at where we're heading and make sure we're still heading where we want to correct, where we want to head. Because it's at that point that the vice president can then lead a tiny little course correction. When you catch it early, a course correction doesn't have to be massive. But
Mm.
if you miss it and it's a financial course correction, for instance, like we need to adjust pricing on something we're selling in the canteen or some merch that we're selling or some program that's coming up, if you catch it early as a leading indicator, you can make the change and then enjoy the benefits by the time you get to annual reporting. But if you get to annual reporting and go, shit, we're way off track, it's too late.
Yep.
You can't go back in time and do that course correction then.
Mm.
So just by every single meeting, the vice president saying, this is where we're supposed to be in these three things that we're doing this quarter to deliver our plan, get some feedback, provide some guidance on what information they've collected by talking to people through the course of the month, and then make any course corrections that they need to. That's a really good discussion. So the hidden cost to me, Steve, in getting this wrong is that we've got somebody sitting in a meeting doing nothing and feeling undervalued. We've got somebody sitting as an understudy. Remember the episode of Seinfeld where Bette Midler was playing Rochelle, and there was the understudy, and she was always grumpy, and I'm so sad because Bette's always wonderful and always good and always there. Like if you're understudy to a Bette Midler, like you can just feel this has taken another turn, hasn't it? You can really feel like you're that person that steps up and everyone in the audience goes, "Oh, I came here to see Bad." Like, so that
Yep.
can be disheartening enough if you don't have a job. But then add to that that there's this expectation, and sometimes it's in the case I gave, the story I gave you, it was true, it was written down. But in
Mm.
most cases, it won't be written down. There'll just be
Yeah.
this unwritten expectation of everyone else in that room saying, "Oh, Mick's going to look after that because he's vice president, and it falls to him." Sugar. It's not my job.
Yep.
So if it's not my job, what is my job? So that's why I love the concept of saying if you don't define the job, it can end up being defined for you. So let's define it and say, let's make this the strategic keeper on trackerer. So sure, they do remain the understudy and step up in the absence of the president to chair meetings or to be the ambassador or spokesperson for the organization if something happens and the president's absent. But other than that, let's have a positive and productive job for every single one of our vice presidents and make them feel useful.
I think that's really important because it's so. I'm just casting my mind back to my own experiences and exposure to the many clubs that we've worked with. It's pretty rare for a vice president to need to. It happens, but it doesn't happen enough for it to be their job and their
Mm.
only job. And like you just pointed out, if someone is sitting there feeling undervalued, they're not going to contribute their time again next year. They're going
Yeah.
to go and invest that time somewhere where they feel it's better placed.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. So the story is we got to make sure that there's a job for our vice presidents because otherwise they'll get one by default.
Mm-hmm.
So not a good way to be running a business. Running a business by accident is not, and hoping is not
Yep.
really a good strategy. It's just a wish. And the tool is really simple. I think that the tool here is a two-step job description. So vice president is the name at the top. Number one, dot point number one, be the understudy for the president. So in the absence of the president, act in place of the president. That's all it needs to say
Yep.
because there's already a PD for the president.
Yep.
Then number two, be the strategic keeper on trackerer. Some words that define that.
Yep.
And then we can have what falls out of that is a standing agenda item every meeting that doesn't drop off because that's the bit that the vice president's prepared for and they're really excited to give the update.
And I think it's important to clarify here that even if your organization doesn't have a strategic plan, it doesn't have a formal document that it points to and says, yeah, that's our strategic plan, this can still be the case. You can still have a vice president who is the planning champion.
Yeah. If you don't have a plan, get a plan.
Get a plan. I know this great company that will help you to create one. Have a guess at who I might be thinking about.
Oh, could it be on my shirt, Steve? Could it be CPRG, the greatest planning consultancy that ever existed? Yes, it must be. So, look, clarity is really important here. So I started with saying there was a complete lack of clarity in that room where everyone thought that people were doing things differently. So at this point, then we need to decide, okay, this is the job of the vice president, and then assign that officially by saying this is the job description. Simple.
Yep.
It's great.
Good. Love it. I can't discern, due to my inability to tell time without a watch, whether we spent more time talking about what we should have been talking about in this episode or more time segueing. But either
Steve,
way, you're welcome, listeners.
If we talked about it, we should have talked about it. It was the universe saying we need to talk about this. This is a critical platform for sharing all thoughts about sports, about governance, about non-profits, about leadership, about meetings. So if we talked about it, there's a reason for that. It was the universe saying there's somebody out there who's thinking, yeah, this is a conversation I want to have. So there might be two outcomes for you, dear listener, from this episode. It might be number
Try
one.
race walking.
Don't try race walking. It's really hard. It's really hard. And it looks so painful. Like on your back, Steve, and it just, I can't imagine you'd survive it.
I
But if you
certainly
want to
wouldn't
have
be
that,
telling anyone that that's how I injured my back.
if you want to have this conversation, you have our permission to do so. When you're sitting around at the dinner table, say, what sports should be in the Olympics? They're going to be here in 6 and a bit years. We got to get this right. What sports are we going to have here? I think there's going to be some that are going to still make it in, even despite the fact that they have an element of subjectivity to it. And if that's what the IOC and the local Olympic planning committees decide, it's out of our hands. That's fine. But more importantly than that, have the conversation about your vice president. It's perfectly okay to have one, even if it's not named in the Constitution. And I would suggest it not be, because then it can be somewhat reactive to the size of the organization and your complexity at any given time. If you've got one, let's make this their job. And if you don't have a plan, really importantly, get a plan. And if you need a plan, notwithstanding Steve's quip about the greatest planning consultancy on earth, we've also got some tools that we can share with you. Send us a message and we will share our planning framework with you, or for nothing if you want to do it yourself and you want to go on your own. If then you know that you can say, well, we've reached out to, they're exactly the same as we do, and we bring in experts to do our planning because we can't see the forest for the trees, then you know how to contact us. Make sure if you're not already following us on social media, there's daily tidbits of information both at CPR Group and at NFP Michael. And sign up for our newsletter on our website. And of course, we've still got these things that receive phone calls. So somebody will be very happy to discuss your challenges, but more importantly, your opportunities and how we can help you make them come true. Steve, as always, it's been wonderful sharing these rants and stories with you. Thanks again to Jess being our wonderful producer and making us appropriate for a PG audience. And until next time, fit for human consumption. And until next time, wishing you all very good governance. See ya.
See ya.
Basket Case Clubs acknowledges the traditional custodians of the country on which we record, being Yugambeh, Turrbal, Jagera and Kabi Kabi land. We recognise their enduring connection to land, waters and culture, and pay our respect to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to First Nations listeners.